All right, we are looking at section 2B.3, absolute and relative change and percent increase and decrease. So absolute change is the final value minus the initial value, and we look at the absolute value of that. So remember, absolute value just means distance from zero. So that is our formula for absolute change. Relative change is always your absolute change divided by your initial value, which is going to give us a decimal answer. And then to make it a percent change, we times that relative change by 100. So it's just the percent form of the relative change. We'll use the words new and old often instead of final and initial. So just be aware that a lot of times I'll reference new and old. When putting the values into a meaningful real life situation, determining what is more or less is very important. This will be done in the objective on interpreting the percent change. So all the absolute change, relative change, and percent changes in Newton will be entered as a positive value, even if the change was a decrease. They usually use the word decrease in the problem to represent the fact that it was a subtraction that was negative before we took the absolute value. So while the absolute, relative, and percent change will all be positive for us, it's important to determine if the final value is more or less than the initial value to interpret the meaning of the change, so that you can say more than or less than or percent increase or percent decrease. When completing your financial project, writing meaningful absolute and relative change statements is required. Identify if the final value makes more or less of or a percent more or less than the initial value. So let's look at some basic examples. Tuition was $1,200 last quarter and $1,500 this quarter. This is a $300 increase. So that is the absolute change. So final value of 1,500 minus the initial value equals absolute change. And remember I said we take the absolute value of that. So final value is this quarter. The initial value or old value was last quarter. So notice 1,500 minus 1,200 is 300, and the absolute value of that is still 300. Then to do the relative change, we take the answer we got from right here. So 300 divided by the initial value, which was last quarter, the old value. So sometimes that's why I like to write the old and the new. So another way of writing relative change is the new minus the old divided by the old. Okay. So then 300 divided by 1,200 is 0.25, and then that's the decimal part. If we want to make that a percent change, we times it by 100, so that'd be 25%. So because the new value is bigger than the old value, that's an increase. So this tuition this quarter is 25% more than tuition last quarter. A common error with these is that the order does matter. A 25% increase from last quarter to this quarter does not mean that there is a 25% decrease from this quarter to last quarter. So it doesn't go the same percentage when you reverse the order. So the statement is not reversible. The denominator changes when we change the order. So the value, so do the values, and the more, the less. Because when you change your frame of reference and you say, I'm going from this to this, the from is always the old, the to is the new. So whatever the old is, that's what we divide by when we do relative change. So that's why the answer will change if you change the order. So let's look at another example. Tuition was 1,200 last quarter and 1,500 this quarter. Find the percent change from this quarter to last quarter. From is the old, to is the new. So the way we've worded it in this problem, we're saying this quarter is now old in our frame of reference, and this is the new. So initial value is 1,500 in this scenario, and the new value, final value, is 1,200. Okay. So when we do our absolute change, we're going to do, remember, new minus old or final minus initial. So 1,200 minus 1,500. And inside that absolute value, that is a negative 300. So we still give the absolute value as being 300, because 300 just means how far am I from zero? I'm 300 units. So that's still the absolute change. So that part doesn't change if you change the order. It's the relative and the percent change that change, because relative change is absolute change over the old. So the old value in this scenario is now 1,500 because that's where we came from. So if we do 300 divided by 1,500, you see that that is 0.2, which as a percent change would be 20% if we multiply that by 100. The tuition last quarter is 20% less than this quarter. The reason we use less is because we had that negative inside the absolute value before we took that. That means our difference went, our value from new to old, it went down in value for that new one. So the newer value is smaller than the older value. So we are less than. Okay, so let's try a couple of these. We've got Orchard Park, New York in 1990. 238 inches of snowfall were recorded. In 1991, 198 inches of snow was recorded. Find the absolute and relative change from 1990 to 1991. And we're talking about the snowfall. So 1990 is the old. So the 238 inches of snow, that's old. 1991 is where we're going to. So that's going to be the new. So new minus old would be 198 minus 238. And that's going to be an absolute value of negative 40, which is just going to be a 40. Relative change would then be 40 divided by the old. Remember, always divide by the old. So 238, or the initial value. So that comes out to about, I'm going to write a few decimal places, 0.168067, and it keeps going. We're supposed to round to the nearest tenth of a percent. So we need to move it to percent form first, and then round that to the nearest tenth. So it's going to be 16.8%. Then we want a meaningful sentence for this. So the snowfall increased or decreased? Well, when we went from new to old, we actually ended up in the negative. So the snowfall decreased. We had less snow in 1991 than we did in 1990 by 40 inches. So notice I don't need a negative here because we're using the word decreased, or 16.8% from 1990 to 1991. In January of 2021, there were 13 dogs waiting to be adopted in a shelter. In January of 2022, as puppies purchased during COVID were being returned to the shelters in record numbers, the shelter dog adoptees in waiting had increased to 48 dogs. Find the absolute and relative change of the dogs waiting to be adopted from 2021 to 2022. Okay, so we're looking at from the 2021 is the old, so that's the number of dogs then. The number of dogs in 2022 is the new. So absolute value of new minus old. That's going to be the absolute value of 35. That's a 35, and it's an increase. Sometimes I like to write that out to the side based on if that was positive or negative before we took the absolute value. And then we take the absolute change and divide it by the old. The old was the 13. And that's about 2.692307, and it keeps going, rounding to the nearest tenth of a percent. So change it to a percentage first by timesing it by 100, and then round to the nearest tenth. So it's going to be 269.2%. So we need a meaningful sentence. The amount of dogs waiting to be adopted increased, since it went up from the old to the new, by 35 dogs, if you want to use absolute change, or 269.2% from 2021 to 2022. All right, if you get a raise for $12, from $12 per hour to $15 per hour, what is the percent change? So we've already got this part, but the old is what we need to figure out for the bottom, because we're looking for the percent change or relative change times 100. So remember, it's new minus old divided by old. So we're dividing by 12. So that is 3 divided by 12, which is 0.25 times 100. So that's going to be 25%. And just to write it out to the side, we went from a smaller number to a newer number that is bigger. So that's an increase. All right, let's look at this one. It says, in 1 year after several major back-to-back destructive hurricanes hit the area, the median home price in one Florida town fell from $308,400 to $206,300. Find the percent decrease. So they're already telling you it's a decrease. Round our answer to the nearest 1/10 of a percent. So this is new. This is the old. So new minus old. And an absolute value on top divided by the old. That top number, I don't remember what I got for that. I didn't write it down. Let's figure it out. 206,300 minus 308,400. That's negative 102,100, but we take the absolute value of that. So it's just 102,100 divided by 308,400. That's going to be about 33.1% when we change it to a percentage. And it is going to be a decrease. A grocery store reduced the price of a loaf of bread from $2.80 to $2.73. Find the percent decrease. So that's going to be 2.73 is the new, 280 is the old price, divided by the old. And just after working this one out, I got 0.025, which is 2.5% decrease. We're going to go through these next ones kind of quickly because it's the same process over and over again. An employee receives a pay increase from $35,000 to $37,500. So this is the old, this is the new. We want the percent increase. So this is 37,500 minus 35,000 in the absolute value divided by the old, which is 35,000. Always try to make your absolute values look a little big and like bolder, because sometimes they start looking like a 1. You don't want that. So once I worked this one out, I got 2,500 on top, 35,000 on the bottom still. That comes out to about 0.0714285 ... If I round to the nearest 1/10 of a percent, that's going to be 7.1%. And that's an increase. Okay, for this one, we're going from 8,000 to 7,550. So this is my old, this is my new. 7,550 minus 8,000, all divided by 8,000 equals 0.05625, or 5.63%, because this time it asked me to round to the nearest 100th of a percent. So move your decimal 2 places to the right and then go to the 100th place for rounding. For number 8, during the financial crisis of 2008, the price of a barrel of crude oil fell from a high of 140, so that's our old, to around 50, so that's our new value. What is the percent decrease? And round to the nearest 1/10 of a percent. So 50 is the new minus the old of 140 divided by 140. I'm not really rounding yet. I just don't have the ability to write a non-repeating decimal forever. So just putting dots. We need to go change it to a percent and then round to the nearest 1/10. So it's going to be 64.3% decrease in the price of that crude oil. And then the very last one. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the median salary in 2021 of a dentist is $163,220 per year, and a veterinarian is $100,370. Find the for the percent change round to the whole percent. So find the absolute change from dentist to veterinarian. So in this scenario, dentist is the old, veterinarian is the new. So this would be new, which would be vet, minus old, which is dentist, divided by dentist. Oh, I just wanted absolute change, sorry. For this first part, we only want the absolute change. Getting ahead of myself. So that is negative 62,850. Absolute value of that would just be $62,850. So $62,850. That's the absolute change. The percent change would then be taking that absolute change and dividing by the old, which was the 163,220, because we're still doing dentist to veterinarian. This comes out to about 0.385063, keeps going. So if I round to the nearest whole percent, that's a 38.5. So that's going to round to a 39%. And then write a sentence. So the median salary of, and we usually reference the new one here, a veterinarian in 2021 was 62,850, and we were less than, remember the veterinarian made less than or 39% less than that of a dentist. And then we want to do what's the percent change if we switch the order from the vet to the dentist. So now the vet is going to be the old and the dentist is going to be the new. So it changes the order. We have now 163,220 minus 100,370. But we're dividing by the old now, which is the 100,370. That is going to equal 0.62618, and that keeps going. Round that to the nearest whole, that's going to be 63%. And then we want a sentence about this. So the median salary, and since we didn't do the absolute change, since that was the same, I'm going to just put this in terms of the percentage. You could say the median salary of a dentist is, you could say 62,850 more than a veterinarian. We already know that that's still going to be the same subtraction, essentially. It would just be more than, but since they only said reference part D, we're going to use the percentage. In 2021 was 63% more than a vet. And then why are B and D different? Why is the percentages so vastly different? Well, it has to do with the fact that the old changed in these situations. That means we divide by a different value in the denominator. The reference point is different. So there's a different initial, or old is what I like to call it, value. So we have different denominators. And that is it for section 2B3.